What happens when there's that knock at the door? Moscow's hastily organized referendums in occupied parts of Ukraine coming complete with house-to-house searches of ballot recipients. It takes the concept of get out the vote to a whole new level. We'll ask about turnout numbers that already beggar belief and what happens after Vladimir Putin's Friday address scheduled before a joint session of the Russian parliament. It's not just Ukrainians who fear knocks at the door. How many fighting-age Russians have really fled? With the Kremlin acknowledging that last week's mass mobilization of 300,000, quote, mistakenly included draftees without prior military experience. We'll ask if the spattering of protests across the country's 11 time zones matters in the end. More broadly, what's Vladimir Putin's plan for those mobilized and for his special military operation once the Ukrainians continue their current advance inside the 15% of territory that he now considers his? How far will he go? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking what's next as Putin goes for broke. Joining us from Vilnius, political analyst Alexandra Filipenko. Welcome back to the show. Want to thank as well for being with us. He is a correspondent now in Paris for the Russian television broadcasting outlet TV Rain, Denis Kataev. Hello. Thanks for being with us. Former French ambassador to Russia, Claude Blanche-Maison, the author of Living with Putin. Welcome.
Thank you.
And we also welcome to the show from Portsmouth, former military intelligence officer Frank Ledwidge, senior lecturer in strategy at Portsmouth University. Thanks for joining us. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation, and you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. First off, though, what just happened in the Baltic Sea? Danish authorities first warning fishermen of a gas leak in the area near the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines that link Russia to Germany, pipelines that are offline at the moment. Now seismologists assert that they detected evidence of not one, not two, but 3 explosions. Oliver Farry has more.
Footage filmed by the Danish military shows a bubbling whirlpool in the Baltic Sea caused by gas leaking out of the Nord Stream pipeline in what several countries suspect to be an act of sabotage. 2 of the leaks occurred northeast of the Danish island of Bornholm and are believed to have struck Nord Stream 1. The second, further south, struck Nord Stream 2. Sweden's Seismic Institute reported that explosions were recorded in the area of the leaks. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, speaking in Poland at the opening of another pipeline, said the circumstances were suspicious.
There are 3 leaks, even with some distance between them, and that is why it is hard to imagine that what is happening is a coincidence.
Her Polish counterpart went further, saying foul play was afoot.
We
don't yet know all the details of what happened, but we see clearly that this is an act of sabotage. An act which likely means a further stage of escalation of the situation in Ukraine.
Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak directly accused Moscow, tweeting that the leak was a terrorist attack planned by Russia and an act of aggression towards the EU. Meanwhile, the Kremlin was being circumspect and said it was preoccupied by the explosion.
The pressure in the pipeline really has fallen significantly. The situation is unprecedented and requires immediate investigation. We are extremely worried by this news.
European dependency on Russian gas has become a wedge issue ever since the start of the Ukraine war, with some opposition figures in the EU calling for a resumption of supplies in spite of sanctions. The United States said it refused to speculate on the cause of the leaks, but added it was prepared to support European countries in their investigation.
So, Frank Ledwidge, you heard there a pretty definitive Polish prime minister. What are your views on what happened?
Well, my views are that it's unlikely to have been Denmark or Norway responsible for this act of terrorism, but that's what it was. I think you can call it that. And it strikes me, though, that even though the pipes aren't used, this did serve a purpose, twofold purpose strategically. And that is, of course, to remind everyone of the dependence that Europe has on Russian petroleum products and gas. The second is to demonstrate a capability, which we've suspected has existed for quite some time. But now we know, I think it's fair to say, that the Russians have, which is the ability to destroy or disrupt not only pipelines carrying gas carrying gas, but also cyber lines too. It's a demonstration of capability, I think.
A demonstration of capability. We had Norway as well complaining of unusual drone activity near its natural gas installations. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, again, that's to keep people on their toes. I think it would be highly unlikely for Russian commandos to try and attack on any sovereign territory, which a gas installation would constitute, Danes or any other country around there. But it's to keep people on their toes and make them understand that they're there and that they have the capability, that is, the Russian armed forces, to cause a great deal of damage should they elect to do so.
Claude Blanche-Maison, natural gas prices up 19% this Tuesday. It's got the whole world on edge. You agree with Frank Ledwidge? This is a way for Russia to send a calling card to the West.
It's very difficult to see exactly to whom this could benefit, in fact. I doubt that the Russian would dare to destroy one way or another Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2, because after all, I mean, with the German sponsors, they have been keen to build up this infrastructure, and I don't see a benefit from that. But it's very difficult to point some responsibilities of something else. Of course, Russia would point on Ukraine, and Ukraine will point on Russia. And Polish Prime Minister will say it's probably coming from the Russian side. It's very difficult to say at this stage. Well, if I was to discuss in economic terms, it will benefit at the very end on people who are selling liquefied gas coming from far away and coming in the European market. Because if this is impossible to get now, this Russian gas, of course, I mean, the European market...
So you're suggesting it could be...
No, and I'm not saying anything.
The Qataris or the Americans?
I don't know. I don't say anything about that. I mean, there is an inquiry. You should look at it. But from an economic point of view, in fact, at the very end, it will benefit to people selling liquefied gas.
Denis Kataev?
Yeah, I agree with you because, as for me, I don't know exactly what's happened. We have no evidence, but on the other hand, I think that this is a Kremlin war, because Kremlin and Putin just declared the hybrid war, something like this, the economic war, the gas war, and also. So I think this Kremlin, but we have no evidence for now. It's a very mystical story, and I agree, maybe first time in my life, I agree with Mr. Peskov, the spokesman of Putin, that it's a very unpredictable and very difficult situation. But what we'll see after, I don't know.
It certainly keeps everybody guessing, Alexandra Filipenko.
Yes, absolutely. But in any case, it is difficult to imagine that this could be accidental. Those 3 leaks at the same day, and I would only add to less understanding. But I must say that it not only shows that Russia can do it, but it also shows probably the resilience. Also talking about a possible nuclear strike or tactical nuclear strike, because for now we've all been talking about this possible deal between Russia, the Kremlin, and Europe, 20% of Ukraine's territory in exchange for cheap gas, and of course unfreezing Russian assets. That was the possible talking point for the Kremlin. But now this becomes less real when there is no pipeline, when there is no possibility to transfer gas. So there can be no deal, 20% of territory in exchange for for cheap gas. So if everything points at Moscow at the end, because as we all know, as we all have said here, we don't know for now, we don't know for sure. But if it really comes down to Moscow, maybe it also shows this resilience to continue the fight and not sitting at the table with Europe anymore. But again, we don't know. And I must add that Secretary Blinken, he said today that this wouldn't have a significant impact on Europe's energy resilience. So we will see again.
And yeah, as you say, we don't quite know. These seismologists at Sweden's Uppsala University stating that the second bigger explosion corresponded to more than 100 kilos of dynamite, and that the explosions were in the water, not in the rock under the seabed. Again, it's early days on that one, but it certainly doesn't come in a vacuum. It's happening at a time of extreme tension. Some are comparing this moment in time to already to the Cuban Missile Crisis of 60 years ago. You have what's expected to be an annexation declaration, perhaps on Friday, by the Russian president. And domestically, there's blowback. 10,000 Russians a day, that's how many are crossing, says Georgia's interior minister. Images of the bottlenecks seemingly longer than last week, with those fleeing telling of detours and bribes at checkpoints along the route. There was also, in Siberia Monday, a recruitment officer critically wounded when he was shot by a 25-year-old man whose mother said he was very upset with a friend who had no prior military experience getting his call-up orders. Instances of protest or sabotage have been monitored across Russia. This is a map compiled by the Washington-based Institute for the Study of War. Denis Kateev at TV Rain, what are you finding in terms of evidence when it comes to how much resistance or how many people are trying to flee?
I'm sure that this is Putin's most unpopular decision for 22 hours, 22 years in power, and I think this is there are no options for him, for Kremlin, after the counteroffensive of Ukrainian army. So they decided to recruit common meat. And thousands of
cannon
civilians.
Is what you mean?
Thousands, cannon meat. Yeah. I think it's therefore they decided to recruit everyone. It's not a mobilization partially, but it's mobilization in total. So they decided to recruit cannon meat. However, Putin's support was based on a consensus, was based on a, if you want, a social contract. We earn, we live, but you do what you want. But now, war is in Russia. War is in Russia. The war in Russia began not 24 February, but 21st September. That is why this is the most unpopular decision in Putin's career. I think we'll see a lot of protests, and my mother, for example, she participated in one of protests in Moscow just after the declaration of mobilization last week. There are a lot of women, and this is a women protest. You can see what's happened now in Dagestan, the south of Russia. So I think this is something changed for now, for Russians and for Russia. That is why I think, we'll see in a few months, in a few days maybe, something interesting.
All right, so for the war beginning on September the 21st,
yes.
You say, we have also those images of people being rounded up in places like St. Petersburg. We don't know how many of those are going to be enrolled to fight. But let me ask you, Alexandra Filipenko, we have the European Border Security Force Frontex announcing 60,000 have crossed over in the past week to Europe. Where you are in Vilnius, have you seen new arrivals from Russia?
Well, since now the borders are closed for Russians in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia and Poland, for Russians with tourist visas. So that is why there is not much influx right here. But in Finland, of course, there are a lot of Russians who are crossing the border there. And there is also a border of Russia with Norway. Russians are crossing there. But the biggest lines, the longest lines, you can see, of course, on the border with Georgia and with Kazakhstan. According to some outlets, 98,000 people crossed to Kazakhstan since the beginning of the mobilization, and more than 50,000 crossed the border to Georgia. So the influx, most people go there because for now the bordering Eastern European countries do not let in Russians with tourist visas, and as we all know, it's very difficult to get European work visas or humanitarian visas. So that is why for now most people go to the east.
Most people going to the east. By the way, Ambassador Blanche-Maison, do you agree with the statement that this is that you heard Dennis say earlier? This could turn out to be the most unpopular decision Vladimir Putin has made in 22 years in power?
Yes, I think Kremlin wanted to avoid to declare general mobilization because it would mean to declare also state of war. But Putin has been attacked by the nationalists on his right side, and maybe the Duma will push him to declare the state of war. And maybe the Duma will criticize the way this partial mobilization has been implemented by the Ministry of Defense and by the governors, because Ministry of Defense was in charge of implementing this so-called partial mobilization, because apparently in the ukaz of Putin there is a secret article mentioning that it could go up to 1 million people mobilized. So which is very, very close to a general mobilization. But of course, I mean, many people are refusing this mobilization, but still, I mean, after all, Russia is a very large country, and I think that they will have their 300,000 people in some days, and the governors are in charge of making some forced mobilization, forced enrollment, and that's why people are so upset about it. But I mean, we see, of course, examples and films coming from Dagestan and from other places. But in many places, I mean, people are not happy, but mobilization it's working nevertheless. In bad condition, as usually in Russia, because after all, normal conscription is also generally a catastrophe.
But the mobilization touched a lot of people. It's not 300. It's a lot of families. So I have a lot of friends of mine who already left the country after the declaration of after the beginning of the mobilization, and they left like Alexandra told. They left to Belarus. Now it's very dangerous to go to Belarus because of Lukashenko is a friend of Putin, and it's very dangerous. But they choose this. But there is no choice. There's no options to escape from Russia. So I think this is a mobilization, general mobilization. Of course, there's no questions for it.
Frank Ledwidge, does the Kremlin care? Yes, it's cannon fodder. Yes, a lot of the people being sent to the front haven't had proper military training. But when you hear Ambassador Blanche-Maison saying that the Kremlin's considering calling up to 1 million, does it matter?
Yeah, it does matter. Although these soldiers will be very limited in terms of individual military capability, with perhaps 2 weeks refresher training for those who need it and less for those perhaps others. What soldiers can do is hold ground. What they can't do is take ground. And the way the Russians have conducted military training in the past tends to have been on the job, as it were. They tend not to get very good basic training, and they're certainly not going to get that now. So in terms of the strategic picture, it's very significant because it represents a full commitment, as the Ambassador and Mr. Gadayev have already said, a full commitment of the Russian state to this war. And on the ground, it'll be a lot more difficult for Ukrainians to retake their land. It'd also be very difficult, by the way, for the Russians to conduct offensive actions, since the soldiers simply won't be capable of doing so without taking huge casualties. So this is a gesture, as it were, but it's a very significant one, a gesture of resolve.
The Kremlin admitting what it calls errors by authorities, but mostly, as Frank Ledridge was saying, it's full steam ahead. The Russian Defense Ministry this Tuesday distributing images of reservists arriving for basic training. This is in the Samara region in Russia's central military district. For Vladimir Putin, this is not a war of aggression as it's depicted here in the West. It's about Russians saving fellow Russians.
People from the territories where this referendum is taking place is the primary focus of our society and has the whole country's attention.
I always wonder, Frank Ledwidge, is that for domestic consumption or is that for an international audience telling the West there?
Oh, very much both. It's telling us that the Russians are, in the American phrase, all in, and telling the Ukrainians, look, you're not going to be retaking any more ground anytime soon. Of course, what the Russians have to do, actually, is hold on now for the next 2 or 3 months while the so-called Rasputitsa happens, which is the winter rains, which will make offensive activities very, very difficult. And the Ukrainians may be in good shape to attack again in winter, and they need to hold the line before then, the Russians. So it's a message, this, both to the West, to us, and indeed internally, of resolve. But it also asks the question of the West, and I think it's a very legitimate question we should be asking, what are we going to do about this? Are we going to allow the Ukrainians to simply carry on as before, taking huge casualties, trying to retake their land, somewhat vainly often? Or are we going to decide that we, the West and Ukraine, needs to deliver a strategic blow to Putin, which would require a step change in the assistance we are giving? Let's hear from the West whether that will happen. I personally doubt it, but let's hope it does.
Well, we did see this Tuesday the French foreign minister in Kyiv committing more of those Caesar missile systems that the French make. And more, the language of France is all in on the side of the Ukrainians.
I think the position is quite clear. I mean, to continue and to implement, to give armaments and modern armaments to Ukraine, because after all, I mean, it's the only way to try to help Ukrainian to roll back the Russian troops. It may work. We'll see that in a few months' time, because probably October will be a terrible month, because after that there is a Rasputitsa and then the freezing of the winter, and probably the war will be still there in springtime. And if the Ukrainian troops manage to roll back the Russian troops, at a certain time, of course, Putin will be put in a corner. And then what will he do? And that's probably why he put all the options on the table, including the tactical nuclear issue. Because if he's put in a corner, for instance, if Ukrainians have taken back most of the Ukrainian territory except Crimea, and they go to Crimea, then Putin will have to take a very difficult decision. But I'm sure, I mean, knowing his character, that he will not surrender. He will never surrender. And he could do, I don't know, I mean, many things, including tactical nuclear device on Ukrainian soil, of course. And then the question is, and Americans are thinking about it, what will the USA and NATO do in that case? It's probably a question for next spring, but it may happen one day.
Frank Ledwidge, is there a plan in case Putin tries a tactical nuclear attack?
The Americans have made very clear that they have delivered messages, both informal and formal, to the Russians, as they say, or at least as the President's spokesman or Secretary of Defense spokesman put it. They've been extremely clear in exactly what the consequences would be in the event of a tactical nuclear strike or demonstration. But just to move back to a second, what we're talking about here is not a few more Caesars or a few more British self-propelled guns to deliver a significant blow on Putin. We're talking really for the Americans to step things up. not a few dozen HIMARS, but hundreds of tanks, hundreds of armoured fighting vehicles, and the kind of armoured mobility the Ukrainians will need really to make an impact on this enlarged Russian force. In the event of a tactical nuclear strike, just to come back to your question, the Americans made it very clear what the response would be. We don't know what it is, but the Russians do.
We don't know what it is, but the Russians do. And the Russians again, and Alexander Filipenko, we had the fresh threats from Dmitry Medvedev, the former president and prime minister of Russia, about nukes. We have what we talked about at the outset, these explosions that took place near the Nord Stream pipelines leading the Baltic Sea that have forced up the price of gas. We don't know if Russia did it, but still, all this happening at the same time as we're getting set to hear Vladimir Putin announce the annexation of parts of Ukraine. Is this the most dangerous moment since the Cuban Missile Crisis?
Looks like it is, and looks like this Cold War 2.0 is at the climax right now. And we definitely can expect Putin to announce that Russia admits those republics. And this draws a line under the special military operation, as they call it. And this will, the goals are achieved, and they might now invite the opposing side to sit down at the negotiating table. Otherwise, they can threaten with launching a nuclear strike. And of course, talking about the tactical nuclear strike, hoping that a frightened Western citizen would demand that politicians not to retaliate against Russia because of the strike on Ukraine, and really to sit down at the negotiating table because, again, tactical. It might seem not all that dangerous. But this Kremlin propaganda is, of course, rushing to speed things up, and a lot of people are saying this is happening because Putin's birthday is on October 7th, and he will be 70 years old. So this a lot of people are saying that the annexation and everything that's happening is kind of a wicked birthday present, if we can put it this way. So that is why everything seems to be starting to get faster, not only because of Rasputitsa, but also because of Putin's birthday, probably.
If we call up the map that shows the front line in eastern Ukraine, we see that the Russians don't control all of the provinces where those referendums have been taking place this Tuesday, well, in the last 5 days, but with the ballot counting happening this Tuesday. So one of the unknowns, and this is where, once again, the Kremlin is keeping everyone guessing, Denis Katayev.
Yes, of course.
Does Vladimir Putin consider that all of, for instance, Donetsk and Luhansk are his sovereign territory, or just the parts that he controls?
I think he will keep the part that he control for nowadays, but
and what if the Ukrainians continue
their
counteroffensive, and they are gaining ground?
Much depends on Ukraine, I think, and on Western countries also the help with the help for Ukraine, and I think and believe that it's not a real nuclear strike, the risk of nuclear strike from Putin, because I think that is a kind of bluff from him, because during his speech, when he declared
he said this is not a bluff.
This is a bluff. That is why this is a bluff, and I suppose this is Putin will continue his hybrid war, and this is the nuclear threat is the kind of this hybrid war.
Keep everyone guessing. Frank Ledridge, you said exactly the same thing Denis said, I believe, last Friday when we spoke. Do you still stand by that now, though?
Stand by what?
The fact that you think it is a bluff.
Yeah, I think that we're on an escalatory path, but there's plenty of steps on that path before we get to nuclear. There's cyber, there's space, there are all kinds of ways that both sides can seriously interfere with the other, and we're a long way yet from nuclear strike, I think. I think it's a mistake to talk this up before it's luminously clear that it's on the horizon. I don't think it is yet. And of course, anybody who's bluffing is going to say they're not bluffing. It's I don't think that's it. It's a futile statement almost.
I don't think it's a bluff, but there are many steps to be taken before coming to the nuclear threshold, including tactical threshold. So these steps will be taken by Putin, and according to what is the situation on the ground. And if I hope it will never happen, but if we come close to this tactical nuclear threshold, I mean, I think we must say that Western leaders have been quite clear in the last days, making clear that there will be a response from the West if that nuclear device would be used. Of course, the response could be a conventional one, not necessarily a nuclear one. It could be on Russian interests outside Russia, for instance, in Syria, because there are Russian bases in Syria. They could be attacked by American missiles or NATO missiles with no nuclear device at all. I mean, many questions are on the table, and I think that Pentagon and NATO are making contingency planning on that, because anything may happen in the coming month.
Anything may happen. The unknown spooking also Russia's neighbors. Earlier you heard Alexandra Filipenko mention how with a lot of European borders closed to Russian tourists, many are heading south towards places like the Caucasus. We also heard from the president of Kazakhstan, which is home to its own sizable ethnic Russian minority.
Territorial integrity of states must be inviolable. This is a key principle. I have always spoken about this openly and clearly in the international arena.
Jomar Tokayev talking about territorial integrity. He expressed sympathy for those fleeing Russia. In recent days, many people from Russia have been coming to us. Most of them are forced to leave because of the current hopeless situation. That's a quote. This after stressing Kazakhstan's neutrality in international forums. Alexandra Filipenko, it's the same Kazakh leader who just a few months ago needed Russia's help when there were protests. Are you surprised?
Well, I'm maybe surprised that again, as you said, that this leader really used Russia's help at some point. But I'm not surprised seeing the people of Kazakhstan helping out Russians so widely. And there are a lot of volunteers working at the borders. Some cinema theaters opened their doors at night so Russians could sleep there, because a lot of people are crossing the border without any money and without any means to have a hotel and sleep at the hotel. So Kazakh people are known to be very hospitable, and they are helping Russians a lot. And to me, it's not surprising that Kazakhstan as a country and Kazakh people are very helpful, but it is a little surprising to hear those words from the president, although he, at the face of President Putin, when they were together on stage, he himself did not support the war in Ukraine. So he did not support the annexation of the territory. So he most probably he feels the support of China behind his back, and that is why he is quite free at expressing his opinions, even at the face of President Putin. So that is why Kazakhstan is accepting so many, almost 100,000 people they accepted since the start of the mobilization, and that is, of course, that is amazing. And I am personally very happy to see that, because a lot of my friends are fleeing there right now, either on their way or already in Kazakhstan.
We've seen already this support of Putin in the summit of Samarkand.
Yeah, this was 10 days ago when there were
that is why
the security summit in Uzbekistan.
Exactly, and that is why I think he decided to announce mobilization, because he has no support except of Lukashenko. Of course, in the post-Soviet countries now, he has no support, of course,
does he
in Western
care?
world, he has no support of China.
But does he care if the Kazakh president is calling for him to respect.
It's very
Ukraine.
important, I think, this position, because he declares that he is totally against the independence of Donetsk and Lugansk republics. So I think for Putin it also was a signal to start something like mobilization and counteroffensive.
But you see, hold on. You and I would take it as a signal to maybe calm things down, have a discussion.
No, for Putin it's not the choice.
Why is it the opposite for Putin?
Who?
Why does Putin go all in when he's
Because
got
he's
blowback?
no choice for him. For now, he.
I think Samarkand was
Yes.
a kind of defeat for Putin, especially because on the eve of Samarkand, Xi Jinping, president of China, went to Kazakhstan and
His
gave
first
the
foreign trip since the start of COVID, and he goes to Kazakhstan.
Official visit at the eve of Samarkand summit, and he gave a kind of guarantee of territorial integrity to Kazakhstan, which is, after all, a big thing, a big guarantee. Kazakhstan be supposed to be an allied, military ally with Putin. It's no more the case, because now it's China. China took over on Kazakhstan. So it's a big defeat for Putin, in fact. And we are not talking about India, but of course, India is very adamant also to say enough is enough.
Yeah, the Prime Minister of India is saying publicly to Putin's face.
Absolutely. This war should come to an end, and we don't accept anymore. And his Minister for Foreign Affairs repeat more bluntly in the UN General Assembly this position of India, because India, of course, has also a problem, because Russia is not producing and sending anymore part for the armament they have sold to India. So, I mean, there's a failure from Putin in the support to India. India has been buying in the past about 75% of its armament to Russia. And now the spare parts are not coming anyway, and the munitions are not coming either. So it's a big problem for those countries.
Yeah, the big problem for him, for Putin, was that he wanted to build a new architecture of the world, maybe something like anti-Western world, and he want to be a leader of this world. For now, it's fallen, and I think that is why he has no choices. That is why he decided to do what he's doing.
So, Frank Ledwidge, you're the leader of a nuclear-armed superpower, and you're slightly paranoid to begin with, perhaps, if you've got a background in the intelligence services. And you now find yourself in a situation where your trading partners, your allies are pushing back. It's fueling that paranoia, and therefore, how do we talk ourselves down from the ledge here? How do we talk Vladimir Putin down?
Well, that's getting into Kremlinology, which neither I nor I suspect many others are fully qualified to speak of. Let's not forget that around Putin there are advisors and there are institutional constraints on decisions made. Let's not forget that. And there are also structural constraints on any decisions if we're talking about extreme escalation. So though orders may be given, there's no guarantee in extremis, particularly in the face of defeat, that those orders will be complied with. It's highly likely they will be, but let's not assume that they are. How you talk someone down from that? Well, I don't think you can. The only way forward, I think, for us is to deal with the situation we have in front of us and go as far as we can to assist Ukraine to achieve its objectives and prevail on the battlefield and take it from there. I think all this theology of the Kremlin is probably counterproductive, since it directs us away from the real problem facing us at the moment.
Alexandra Filipenko, we had the Patriarch of the Orthodox Church, Kirill, talking about once again putting out statements fully endorsing Vladimir Putin. You heard Ambassador Blanche Maison mentioning how Putin has hardline nationalists to his right. Are there really people in his inner circle who can give him a different point of view on all this?
Well, after 22 years in power, it looks like there is no one in his inner circle who can really change his mind or really talk him down or contradict him in any way. But this rush of Kremlin to shift the responsibility on its subordinates, it almost certainly might at least strengthen the feeling among the bureaucracy and people around Putin that the president is trying to make them the scapegoats. And the situation where Putin is really weakening the international arena, and the bureaucracy is now trying to figure out whether it is time to bring him down. Maybe the time is right now. So this game might be actually fatal for him. Although for now, no one in the inner circle, no one very close to him is probably ready to contradict him. But if Kremlin continues to make the bureaucracy and the governors and everyone else the scapegoats, maybe they will finally decide not to talk him out of things, not to talk him out of war, continuing the war, but maybe bring him down in the end.
Because Alexandra, you heard Denis Katayev earlier in the conversation saying how this call-up, this mobilization, it affects those involved, obviously, but it affects entire families, even those who have always supported President Putin. He must have known that before he made the announcement. So why do it?
Well, he's known not to, let's say, crack under pressure. He is always raising stakes. And it seems that, I think that Denis Katayev would agree with me, because everyone who's been studying Russian inner politics and what's been happening in the elections and inside Russia for all these years, it doesn't seem that Kremlin really cares a lot about what people think or what people say, or even about the protests. That's been quite a few protests, especially in 2012 and 2013, 2014, etc. But Kremlin doesn't really seem to care about what Russian citizens think or Russian citizens say. And they really care only about people in the inner circle, and if they're loyal, because there are 5 million military men, not military men, but policemen and Ross Guards, that's National Guards, 5 million of them in Russia. So they can crack all the protests and everyone who is against it. So that is why it seems that President Putin is only doing what he's been doing for 22 years, is always raising stakes.
Always raising stakes. And what happens, once again, and I'll put it to you, Frank Ledwidge, what happens when Ukraine gains territory the day after Vladimir Putin announces that those territories are now part of Russia?
Well, I'm sure the ambassador and the others on this panel will know. Putin tells a story about finding in his stairway in a St. Petersburg apartment a rat. And the rat is cornered, and the rat fights for its life, and it will take there'll be no compromise. And Putin has drawn a line, and I think it seems to me that these annexations represent a line. And I do think that we will step further should that happen, and I think it should, that the Ukrainians take their land back or begin to do so, that we will see a step further along the escalatory path that we discussed earlier. Now, what form that takes, we will see. I don't think it'll be nuclear, but it will be very significant. And that's the whole purpose, of course, I suspect, of these maneuvers, is to render that line a very, very clear color of red.
The Pentagon reacting in the last minute, saying we take threats seriously, but at this stage, we've not seen anything to cause us to adjust our own nuclear posture at this time. Claude Blanche-Maison, a wide palette again before we graduate to the worst-case scenario.
Well, I think the use of nuclear power is part of the strategy of Russia. Of course, it's the extreme part, and I hope, of course, that they will never come to that, but it's not excluded. And in fact, what could happen maybe if Putin is put in a corner, and if the Ukrainian army is taking most of the country, finally, in some month. What he could do is to send some kind of nuclear device, maybe on some part of Ukraine without population. It's possible. Some island, for instance,
as one of the scenarios.
just to put, I mean, all the world in a very difficult position, because what would be the reaction of the NATO people? What would be the reaction of the American? Nobody knows exactly.
Nobody knows exactly. We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, because we're running short on time. Claude Blanche-Maison, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank Denis Katayev.
Thank you.
I want to thank as well Frank Ledwidge for being with us from Portsmouth, Alexandra Filipenko in Vilnius. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.
Thank you.